Welcome to the Power of Partnership podcast. I'm Riane Eisler, president of the Center for Partnership Systems. This podcast brings you voices from the partnership movement, people using partnership practices to build a world that values caring, nature, and shared prosperity. The Power of Partnership podcast is hosted by Sherry Jacobs Pruitt, AL's policy and partnership scholar. And now on to the POP podcast.
Welcome, Paola, to the Power of Partnership podcast series. And on behalf of the entire Center for Partnership Systems team, we are so honored you're able to join us here for this interview. So, Paola, you are an associate professor at the Department of Media and Digital Culture at Tecnológico de Monterrey in Mexico, and a faculty associate at the Berkman Klein Center for Internet and Society at Harvard University. You're also co-founder of Tierra Común, a network of academics, practitioners, and activists interested in data decolonization, and you coordinate the Latin American and Caribbean hub of the Feminist Artificial Intelligence Network. So, of course, a key aspect of all this work relates to the connection between technologies such as social media and artificial intelligence and social causes and politics. I wonder if we can start dissecting some concrete examples of these connections by using the 4 cornerstones that Dr. Riane Eisler has identified and provided for us that really serve as the levers to help us move or away from the domination end of the social lens continuum that is one towards, that reinforces violence and injustice, and instead help us shift more towards the partnership end of that continuum that reinforces peace and egalitarian structures. Those 4 intersecting cornerstones that she describes are child and family relations, gender issues, economics, and then, of course, the narratives and stories. So can you speak a bit about the issues related to technologies? Let's take the cornerstone of gender issues.
Yes, sure. Thank you very much, Sherry. Thank you very much for the invitation and for this opportunity to engage in this conversation. And it's interesting because we are essentially speaking about how relationships are shaped by technology and how these relationships shape every aspect of our social life. So when we speak about gender issues, we can think of any of the aspects related to gender discrimination, gender exclusion that we have been experiencing historically. And we can think, of course, how technology can exacerbate those historical forms of exclusion. And for example, the UNESCO had published a report where it highlights the gender disparities and how women in the workforce are paid less, how women hold fewer positions, decision-making positions, how women participate less in STEM fields. The share of female workers in data and AI globally is about 32%. So we need to take action to change, for example, how women are supposed to relate to technology again, and also how women can be not only users, but also developers of technology and also communities. We need to foster and also provide the conditions for communities to develop the technologies they need if we want to change the power asymmetries that are present now in the current technological development model.
Nice. So can you give some concrete examples, for instance, in your work with the Feminist Artificial Intelligence Network? Can you share with us what some of the priority areas you all are working on?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, for me, the Feminist AI Research Network and the project that is related to that network, which is the Incubating Feminist AI project. Over the past 3 years, we have been working with 16 projects that are led by women here in Latin America and the Caribbean, precisely because we have other projects in other regions of the Global South. But here in Latin America, we have like 16 teams that have been working to develop their own technologies aimed to foster social change, to help women to achieve, for example, access to justice, or, for example, to show how some technologies are biased, not only gender biased or racially biased, but also how technologies, for example, reproduce certain stereotypes about what women are or what women should do. So for me, this is really an example of how, if we create appropriate conditions for women to flourish, to develop their own technologies, they absolutely are capable to foster social change and achieve better conditions, not only for them, but for society at large.
Nice. And can you speak about where issues related to family relations and how children are impacted by technology?
Well, of course, technology is mediating every relationship and also is shaping how we educate children, how we understand learning, for example. I would say that it's important for us as society, as communities, as families, as societies, to understand that some uses of technology not always are positive to foster these meaningful relationships. So we need to find a balance in which we can use technology to achieve these social goals, to learn, to work, to relate to each other, but also without undermining other possibilities of constructing spaces for communities to strengthen their ties, for communities to organize, for communities to share knowledge and also to share experiences, because that is what makes our societies really flourish and accomplish their common goals. We are now in a moment where we assume that everyone is connected, that everyone has the same possibilities to access technologies. But the pandemic showed that most people do not have access to technology, to internet, and that has a huge impact in their possibilities, for example, in this case, to access to education. So if we do not create conditions for everyone to have at least the same basic conditions, we cannot assume that that everyone is now in the same place. We are still struggling to find the ways in which we can recover those years where these children were left out of the possibilities of learning. And in many countries, I'm originally from Ecuador. In many countries like Ecuador, where you don't have like when you have, for example, power shortcuts, when you don't have electricity, when families share one cell phone and they do not have like a good connection, like in other countries, like in the US, because the quality of connection is also important. Not only the connection, but the quality of it. Mm-hmm. So we are still struggling, and we don't know how to find a way in which we can really help these children to reach these learning goals that will take them to a better future. So, as you said, we have this world in which some people are privileged enough to have everything, every type of technology, the best connection, access to knowledge, to information. And we have this other group of people that are completely excluded. So unfortunately, if we don't take action as a society, and of course our governments are also responsible for that, the gap is going to widen in the future.
And of course, when I think about technology issues related to children and family dynamics, I, as a parent and grandparent, can't avoid thinking of the games, technology, games that are on the internet, Call of Duty, games that are really potentially desensitizing individuals to violence.
I would say that we need to think this in a broader sense, because what I've found, again, as I'm a mother as well, and I struggle a lot with my children, but I'm a privileged person in this country, to find spaces for children to have like a more meaningful relationship with, for example, the environment or with other children. So most families and most communities are deprived of the possibilities of having their families and their children to meet with each other. I was speaking before about this because the society in which we live, like, pushes families and people to work all the time, to be constrained in a very little space. So that has implications implications for our relationships. And for example, parents, families do not have time to play with their children. There are no outside spaces for children to run or to, to see how plants grow, because if you live in a city, for example, I live in Mexico City, and it's very difficult for children to understand how plants grow and how to take care of plants, or animals. We are detached from the relationship with environment in a very deep way. So I think that is also part of the picture, that we are missing all those opportunities to meaningfully relate to each other and the environment. And then children are like just using their cell phones or computers, and there are few opportunities for them to find other activities that could be meaningful for them.
And how about economics and the issues related to the domination perspective with economics versus partnership perspective?
Well, yeah. I always say that the hegemonic model of technological development is driven by the market. Actually, this term was coined by a sociologist, an Italian sociologist called Gramsci, because he said that in society, you have two types of control, or if you want to call it domination. one is produced by a force like military development, but the other is produced by other means that are not forceful.
You are listening to the Power of Partnership podcast. If you would like us to share your partnership story, or if you would like to become a proud sponsor of the POP podcast, please contact us at center@partnershipway.org. And now, back to today's episode.
So that's hegemony. You control, but it's not like you are forcing people, like in physical terms, but in a way, you are controlling relationships because you control like the means in which societies operate. So for me, when technology, in this case, the technologies that we all use every day, belong to only a few individuals in the world that belong to the 0.001% of society, then you have an hegemonic relationship. So there are so many constraints in the use of these technologies that we are so dependent that in the case that any of these companies decides to change the rules of the game, we are like powerless. So that is why there is a movement around the world to impose stronger regulations on these companies because they have become even more powerful than nation states, because their power is transnational, and it's a power that is based not only on resources like economic resources, but as I said, in the deep infrastructure that is the mediation of every social activity, economic activity, political activity, educational activity. So we depend on them. And that is not good.
So the statistic you just shared that that technology is owned by just 0.001% of the population. How can we change that? What does ownership of technology look like? What does that mean?
Why I think it's important to provide communities the conditions to own their own technologies, because in this way, we promote autonomy, sovereignty, and also we make sure that the communities develop the technologies they need for their own purposes. And in this way, we can try to avoid those technologies that are imposed by someone else. And I'm going to share just one example. Here in Mexico, there are indigenous communities that have developed their own cell phone infrastructure. So, and also their own internet connection. So they do not depend on the governments or private companies to have internet access, to use their cell phones. There is also another example that I think it's wonderful. There is a Maori community in New Zealand that has developed their own natural language processing technology, which is a type of AI that analyzes language and provides patterns and helps us. For example, it's what is used when we use translators, automated translations. And they have developed this technology for the Maori language, but also they have developed the licenses to use this technology to use the data that is created by the community because they collected their own data about their language, about their community that fits this technology. So this is a way in which this community makes sure that the data is, for example, not used for profit, but for the common good, and is also fostering the conservation of their language, their memory, their cultural memory, and also they are guaranteeing that new generations have the opportunity to relate to the language in a way that is more accessible to them and do more things with their language to produce knowledge, analyzing, for example, how this language works. So I think this is a very good example of technologies that are developed by the communities, for the communities, and for the common good.
So the last cornerstone for us to touch briefly upon, how does the domination versus partnership orientation on the social lens continuum show up related to the narratives and stories that we're immersed in our cultures?
Well, that's a wonderful question because every technological development is surrounded by stories, narratives, myths, metaphors, right? And if we think about it, these narratives are very powerful. The metaphors are also very powerful and also shape the way in which we relate to those technologies. So it's important to understand how these narratives and stories are constructed and what do they obscure, what do they want to hide from us. And in general, we can say that these metaphors, these narratives, usually try to disconnect us from the true nature of technology. For example, we think of AI as something that is almighty, super powerful, even magic. And also we think of AI as automated, right? Like something that works like without human interaction. But in reality, there is a lot of human labor involved in developing AI tools. And that is something that we are not usually aware, because for us to use any technologies, any AI technology in particular, there is a lot of precarious workers that have done a lot of work for us to have the services that we use every day. So when we think about a cloud, we think about this, I don't know, white, beautiful thing in the sky. But in reality, the cloud are warehouses where data is stored. And these data centers consume tremendous amounts of water and also energy because they need to be cold. And that is also obscured with this metaphor or this narrative about the cloud because it's grounded. The data centers are grounded in the consumption of energy and water and also labor. So I would say that we need to be, as a society, try to understand the way in which dominant narratives are out there, trying to make sure that we do not connect the problematic issues with the current technological development. So I would say the power of stories and narratives is immense. And because of that, we should work very hard in our communities to try to create our own stories, to share our own experiences, and to make sure that the stories that are told represent our own experiences. Share an example that comes from the experience of Latin America. As you know, Latin America is one of the most violent regions in the world. And especially the violence against women is terrible. And usually nation states, governments do not acknowledge the violence that exists against women. And in Mexico and other countries of Latin America, Argentina, Brazil, women, the feminist movement in particular, they have created a movement around data about feminicides that challenges the figures that are usually shared by governments that do not recognize the real numbers of women that have been suffering violence in our countries, in our societies. So this is a powerful way using data to create a different narrative, to create a different story. And here in Mexico, for example, the president was saying, well, these are the data, these are the figures. And the women said, well, we have different data. So we have a different story. And in this way, of course, we can challenge the wrongful stories about ourselves. And of course, we can also try to achieve justice for all.
So how about resources or next steps for our audience members who want to learn more and or get involved?
There are many organizations around the world that are doing amazing job. There, for example, there is the Association of Progressive Communications. They have a website with wonderful resources, with many blog posts from people around the world that are thinking about these issues. There is also the organization called IT for Change that have developed a tremendous amount of resources, like trying to think about these issues. Our coalition, the A+ Alliance for Inclusive Algorithms, also you can find there the work that we are doing, trying to develop AI technologies with a feminist lens. There is also another organization, another network called Tierra Común. In that network, we are trying to raise awareness about the processes of datification, which means the process of converting everything into data. Fortunately, there are many organizations around the world that are doing amazing work. But I would say try to connect with your communities and try to learn together, think together, and do things towards achieving the technologies that we need.
Wonderful. That is so helpful. And for our audience members, I will be including links to all of those resources in the show notes for today's episode, along with, of course, a link to the Center for Partnership Systems, where you can always access resources and courses to dig deeper into Riane Eisler's Domination, Partnership, Social Lens Continuum, and the 4 cornerstones of childhood and family, gender issues, economics, and narratives, and the stories that help inform those cornerstones. Also, I will include a link for you to be able to join the center's email list so that you can stay current about all of our center's news and events. So before we close, Paola, I wonder if you have any final thoughts or words of wisdom that you'd like to share with our audience.
I believe in our collective wisdom to create a world where many worlds fit, as the Zapatistas say here in Mexico.
Thank you for listening to the Power of Partnership podcast. We're grateful to Rising Appalachia for the use of resilience as our Power of Partnership theme music. If you would like us to feature your partnership story, or if you would like to be a proud sponsor of the Power of Partnership podcast, please contact us at center@partnershipway.org. We hope you enjoyed this episode and will leave us a review on your favorite podcast channel. And don't forget to subscribe to be notified when new episodes are released. I'm Cherry Jacobs Pruitt. See you next time on the Power of Partnership podcast.
I am resilient. I trust the movement. I negate the chaos. Uplift the negative. I'll show up at the table again and again and again. I'll close my mouth and learn to live.